Okay, anywho. This is what is this? This is How We Got Stuck, The Origins of Hierarchy and Inequality by Jonathan Birch and Andrew Buskell in review article in, where are we? We are in Mind and Language. So, okay. So there's a review of Kim Sterelny's book, The Pleistocene Social Contract. So, all right. But this could be fun too. So let's go. As always, feel free to ask questions. In YouTube, can put comments down below. It's like, hi YouTube, everybody. The Rise of Elites. The Pleistocene Social Contract is Kim Sterelny's third book about human social and cognitive evolution. Although not intended as such, the books form a reasonably coherent trilogy, certainly more coherent than the last 3 Star Wars episodes. I mean, this is interesting because, they don't know when this was published, and so the fact that there could be 3 more Star Wars episodes by the time this came out, or by the time anyone's reading this. Okay, the first, Thought in a Hostile World from 2003, offered an account of the evolution of a form of belief-desire psychology, decoupled representation, that stressed both in its distinctive value in early hominin social worlds and the distinctive value of being able to track it in others, theory of mind. The idea of debunking genealogy of morality or religion is familiar. What Sterelny offered was at least a partially vindicatory genealogy of folk psychology. Okay, so basically it's saying, that you can decouple what you're thinking about, and that gives you a ground for your folk psychology. The folk psychology can actually work and by giving you a theory of mind of others. The second episode was The Evolved Apprentice. That's from 2012, a gradualist and multifactorial account of how humans evolved such distinctive cognitive profile in comparison with our great ape relatives. Ideas sketched briefly in the first book were developed in much greater depth here. The idea of a scaffolded learning environment where juveniles learn through structured trial and error in an environment richly seeded with the products of adult cooperation, everything from partially processed foods to partially made tools, is at the heart of the story. Hominins, in Sterelny's picture, became increasingly reliant on this mode of cultural learning, driving self-driving life history changes, a greatly extended childhood, and cognitive challenges, adults evolving to be tolerant and supportive of their apprentices who evolved to learn rapidly and reliably from their role models. Hey Valpo, what's up? That made them exceptionally good at it. Evolved apprentices. Yeah, so this is interesting. It's like, how do we actually catch kids up when we are getting increasingly more sophisticated as a culture, as a society, as whatever sort of animals we actually are. So we had to evolve a way to evolve, to catch up new humans. So this is this scaffolded learning environment. So we're using tools to actually teach better. So it's a way to, pull people up faster, to get them more on board faster. I actually think that this is a really fundamental thought. I'm always thinking nowadays that this is really at a lot of our psychological problems, is that we've got all these things to catch people up, but they're not working correctly because things are really changing differently fast in the last 100 years. And so I think we're not actually doing a good job getting people to think what they need to think, and that's really messing with people's psychologies. So this idea is really, I think it's an interesting one, and I think it's really messing up people's psychology right now, that the way we are educating people is just not working for all the new concepts and all the ways we exist nowadays. Anyway, the third episode picks up where The Evolved Apprentice left off, recapitulating the main ideas before launching into a detailed account of how human social organization changed over time, with a particular focus on the Pleistocene-Holocene transition about 11 to 12,000 years ago. This is the transition in which humans across the world, and they were by this point modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, embraced farming and also, it seems, became far more tolerant of hierarchies and inequalities of wealth and status. The focus is primarily on social evolution, culture and cooperation, rather than on cognitive evolution. A quite modern suite of cognitive abilities is assumed to be in place long before the Holocene, and the question is why, without underlying cognitive changes, social organization changed so dramatically. What Sterelny calls the Pleistocene social contract, in which aspiring aggrandizers were reliably knocked back by coalitions of groupmates, creating intense kind of stability known as forager egalitarianism dissolved into multiple independent events in different parts of the world. Why? It was not the rise of the state. This puts the cart before the horse because trans-egalitarianism societies with marked hierarchies and inequalities precede well-organized coercive states. Nor was it a case of the worst off endorsing Rawls' difference principle and choosing inequality for their own benefit. It is not credible that inequalities made the worst off better off, since, as a tradition in anthropology starting with Solons has persuasively argued, farming is a grueling, miserable existence for those at the bottom of the emerging social pyramid, not at all to be preferred to foraging in environments with copious food. As Strelny puts it, foragers leave their excrement behind, farmers live amongst it. So what happened? Strelny's account posits 4 enabling conditions: reliable food surpluses that can be stored, tension between neighboring communities, clan-like social organization, and widespread cultural transmission of ritual and religion. Enabling conditions make a transition possible without necessitating it. The idea is that the transition will happen only if other historically contingent factors are also in place, but no robust general account can be given of these other factors. All right, so this is where I kind of would want like a historian like Shane or even Maddie, who knows anthropology and like archaeology, because this sort of thing makes me worried. Now, it feels like this is a philosopher telling the historians and the anthropologists what their business is. It's like you were going to say, oh, these are the necessary conditions, but not sufficient for a society of this sort to be built. Maybe these make sense, maybe they don't, but like the enabling conditions, these are basically the sufficient conditions that we need to have for like a hierarchical society. Is this actually feasible, or is this like reasonable in terms of the other disciplines? I'd want to know. And so the idea that these are necessary conditions is like, do they actually make sense, or like they even get close? I have no idea. Frank Big Time, what's up? How you been? It seems impossible to be confident of 4 changes happening at the same time. How could you know that storable food surplus can't do it by itself? See, that's the thing. Yeah, and the other changes were just contingent. Yeah, exactly. This is the problem. It's like maybe one is the causal factor and maybe the others just, happen to be contingent. But like this is why this sort of thing worries me, is because it seems like the philosopher wants to impose a certain kind of idea on the world, and I don't know if the history bears that that these are the necessary conditions, or does one cause the others, or any other sort of combination. Yeah. So this is a question. It's like how do we actually get this stuff, and like can we even get this stuff from these histories being lost from so long ago? And if we are talking about stuff that's been lost from so long ago, does this even make sense, or are we just making up fantasy stories? Like if Kim Strelny, and Kim's guy, by the way, Kim Strelny says he's like, no, well, this had to be something like this. It's like, no, that's just like a fantasy. That's kind of like your opinion, man. Maybe all these things had to happen at some point, but maybe they're all contingent. Like maybe something else is really the factor, and so looking at these is really just sort of misguided. Okay. Anyway, reviewers say, why were these 4 factors enabling conditions? Reliable, storable food surpluses create opportunities for aggrandizers who seek personal wealth to accrue it. See, this is the thing. Like, they're talking about aggrandizers here. Is this really... It's the wrong thing. Like, aggrandizers. Like, were there always aggrandizers? Or maybe it happened the other way around. I don't know. Like, maybe people were always aggrandizing, but then, like, you could accrue it with the storable food. But weren't there other things to actually have, like, precious metals that you could always store? Well, yeah, exactly, Frank. You can't have wealth and quality until you have wealth, but the right kind of wealth. Like, why does it have to be food wealth? Maybe it could be, other things. Okay, growing intercommunity tensions create opportunities for these aggrandizers to generally benefit for the masses by brokering peace with neighboring communities. Okay, so now we've got like a capitalistic sort of political theory here. Like, okay, the way you make it is like inter community merchandising or something. See, by hosting large feasts. Really? Is that really how you do it? While at the same time ramping up the potential costs of within-group conflict aimed at bringing the aggrandizer down, since a disharmonious group will be more easily defeated. So this is literally divide and conquer theory. That's what they're saying. This person is using the food to divide and conquer. Like, alright, this is an old story. Does this have anything to do with reality? I don't know. Or is this just some fantasy? Okay, as Strelny puts it, the competitive and fraught relations between communities, and hence the advantage of signaling one's wealth, strength, and allies, opens this door to aggrandizers to turn wealth into political leadership and leadership into wealth. Clan-like organizations in which patrilineal, or in some cases matrilineal, kin groups have strong obligations to assist each other despite geographic separation, creates a network that enabled would-be aggrandizers to recruit social and material support, and through which that support could be rewarded. Finally, and most provocatively, the widespread cultural transmission of ritual creates a different kind of elite, an epistemic elite regarded as possessing esoteric knowledge of the supernatural, and trusted with leading group-wide rituals. Again, what were the people actually believing back in the day? Like, is this just like this fantasy that someone knows magic, or is this like, you know, something else? Like, were they just the educated people? I mean, is this esoteric knowledge, or is it esoteric knowledge of the supernatural? What's the supernatural here? Like, what does that even mean way back in the day? Okay. Well, if you could tell, like, when the weather was going to change, that is basically magic to the people back in the day, Frank. It's like, completely agree. So, this enables mutually beneficial alliances to form between the epistemic and material elites. Shamans, in return for material privileges of their own, purport to reveal hidden truths favorable to the continuation of the unequal social order. The ritual and religious lives of these trans-egalitarian communities became channels through which the community is half persuaded, half coerced into accepting the new status quo. Religion on this account is the handmaiden of inequality, hierarchy, and living in shit. I mean, I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying, is this the causal story? What is this causal story? Or is this some sort of, I mean, like a handmaiden does not mean is what caused us living in shit. Okay. These trans-egalitarian communities were what Dennett might call hemi-demi-semi states. There was no effective coercive apparatus, but the real threat of war with neighbors, along with the bogus but credible threat of supernatural consequences, could be dangled before the non-elite masses as a form of quasi-coercion, a sufficient motivation to keep the tribute flowing. Meanwhile, opting out, returning to a foraging existence, became ever less valuable as settled communities engulfed the more favorable foraging environments, pushing foraging communities to where they remain to this day, the margins. Yeah, I mean, this is true. I'm sure that people got pushed out when, like, the towns, you know, grew up. But, like, that's not a big deal. Now, the question is, does the propaganda work? Always has. Like, that's why people do it. So you can always, like, threaten people, and, like, you know, eventually it can work. Okay. This is big picture narrative explanation, but of a distinctive kind. Big pictures are often encountered in commercial books where it is important to entertain. If attention to detail loses out in the trade-off, so be it. Speculative stories of prehistory are sometimes also used to make philosophical points, as in the work of writers as far removed from each other as Thomas Hobbes and Philip Kitcher. For Strelny, by contrast, narrative explanation is the serious business of constructing an account that aims for as much robustness and generality as can be achieved, and that joins up with archaeological, ethnographic, psychological, and primatological evidence in as many places as possible, as well as with the results of mathematical modeling and simulation. The result is an exceptionally well-informed and credible account. Okay, so that is what Kim Strelny did. They basically went and did all the back work to say this is kind of how we think this, like, everything arose. Okay. Authors say, nonetheless, our aim in the following section is to find a few points where the account can be challenged. We will begin with some reflections on what can or cannot be safely assumed about the rationality of early humans before turning to the significance or not of cultural group selection. In the final section, we compare Strelny's big picture with an alternative, or is it, from Graeber and Wengrow. Alright, so basically, Kim Strelny, who's a very good philosopher, I know I've read their philosophy of biology. I think a pretty good philosopher overall. Yeah, so they went and they tried to actually make a big picture story supported by the evidence. So, the rationality of early humans. Yeah, see, we've been reading for like a good 20 minutes or whatever, and I'm only like 2 pages in. This is what I mean by it's small words on a big page. Okay. The rationality of early humans. To explain transitions in social organizations, we need to be willing to impute at least some rationality to early humans. We need to make some assumptions about their goals, and we need to assume a certain level of stability in these goals across geographic regions and across generations. Yet we also need to make room for ways in which early humans were like us, far from ideally rational, and to allow for the possibility of both synchronic variety and diachronic change in their goals and values. How do we strike that balance? This is one of the major methodological choices that confronts anyone attempting to build an account of human social evolution. Strelny's account provides an interesting case study. As his attention turns from the Pleistocene to the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, he becomes notably more willing to employ the concepts of rational and irrational. This is in line with his qualified endorsement in past work of a rational choice framework for understanding prehistory. His explanation of the origin of farming, for example, is an explanation of why it would have been rational for a fitness-maximizing agent to adopt farming, even granting the Solon's view that the transition involved a gradual decline in the quality of life of the worst off. It is an account of how incremental adjustments that would have seemed minor and sensible at the time might nonetheless have led to an end state worse than the now irrecoverable initial state. Yeah, I mean, this is a hill climbing. And what happens is, like, you're doing better and better, but you get yourself to a local maxima, and then all of a sudden you realize, like, you were better off at, like, some other spot, but you can't go down the hill anymore. And this is just in terms of machine learning. It's you can, like, you get yourself, like, stuck on, like, a small mountain when you realize there's much better places you could have been, but, like, you can't go down once you're at the top. It's just how the because you'll be making your life worse off if you go down again, so you don't want to do it, even if, like, going down and getting to some other place would be better. This is one of the problems with machine learning, is that you can't tell all the time if where you're headed is just going to stop, and then you're going to have to go backwards and waste all that time to get yourself to a better place. So, okay. An important idea in the background is the tragedy of the commons, a population of humans making individually rational choices to dial up the intensity of their storage and management of food resources may nonetheless find themselves depleting the environment to such an extent that they foreclose the option of ever returning to a foraging in a world of abundant food. Yes, that's one of the things. Local maxima is like a short-term planning, and so you get all the food you can, but then you've destroyed the environment and you're screwed in the long run. So, okay, this rational choice framework leads to some deep puzzles. Consider, for example, Strelny's brief account of the origin of property rights. Oh wow, he's trying to derive property rights from, like, rational choice. Okay, that's hard. I mean, and by hard I mean, like, it's tenuous. Farming also encourages a shift to norms that respect property rights and to formal or informal sanctions for violating them. Hey, Withered Inside, first time chat. What's up? Hi, you wanted to offer a promotion to my channel? You're so kind. I really like that, and I will ban you for it. Withered Inside, though. That was a good name. That's really unfortunate I have to ban someone named Withered Inside. Yeah, that's like the best ban I've ever done. Every other time it's like, some nonsensical name. I feel like they probably stole someone's actual account and used it to hawk their wares. Okay, anyway. Quote, farming also encourages... Yeah, first name, exactly, Frank. There's always, like, numbers in, like... Because those are the random accounts. But yeah. Farming also encourages a shift to norms that respect property rights and to formal or informal sanctions for violating them. Farmers invest in their farms and crops, initially by holding back seed to plant, and then clearing land in preparing and improving soils, intending crops, and investing in tools and plant, harvest, process, and store produce. They invest in a built environment, not just in their land and crops. These investments in crops and buildings would be profoundly irrational without secure possession of product. Property rights function as guarantees of secure possession. Yeah, see, this is the thing. Does it really? property rights. Like, yeah, from looking back on it, you might think so, but like at the time, it may not have seemed so clear. Ugh, neck is stiff. I think that's what's getting me down. I've been like staring straight ahead for like days, and my neck hurts. I was like, come on, what is that? Yeah. The puzzle. That was end quote. The puzzle here is that of how, prior to the existence of states, there could have been guarantees of securing that were solid enough to make investment in land rational for an individual seeking to maximize fitness. Yeah, why is property rights? Like, who's going to guarantee this? There is no state to enforce them, and the informal coalitions of forager egalitarianism are not around to enforce them either. Who is? In the Bowles and Choi model Strelny cites, farming and strong social norms of respect for property rights proliferate as a package deal under group selection when they emerge together by chance, but this only happens in only 31 of 1,000 simulation runs. The mystery only deepens when we note that to really make investment rational for a fitness maximizing agent, rights of inheritance also have to be respected, as Strelny points out. This makes the fluke simulation emergence hypothesis even less plausible. Yeah, this is the thing. And why and how would you even generate a situation where they have property rights? What are the preconditions for thinking that property rights are going to emerge? Like, really? Like, how would you come up with preconditions for thinking that property rights emerge? Like, why? And even if you give some, why those, not some other ones? Like, and what were the preconditions for that? Like, it seems very difficult to say these are the necessary conditions for a theoretical theory, which is that we have property rights. Okay. Gintis has a different approach to property rights, one that rests on an analogy with territoriality. In many animals, conflicts over territory are often resolved non-violently in favor of the incumbent. This is plausibly because violent conflicts is extremely costly, and a default policy of resolving conflict in favor of the incumbents is an evolutionarily stable strategy for avoiding those costs. But as Gintis notes, there is also an anti-property equilibrium in his model where conflicts are resolved by default in favor of migrants. Gintis appeals to the group selection as an explanation for why real equilibria tend to favor incumbents, but Strelny is generally skeptical of appeals to group selection in the human case for reasons we will discuss in the next section. So the chicken and egg problem regarding norms of property ownership and investment in land remains stubbornly in place. Yeah, this is the thing. How do you get theoretical things into our heads? Like, you can't just put theories into our heads in any easy way. This actually, for those who know logic, there's a problem in logic called the adoption problem. How do we ever get the norms of logic into our head? Like, how do we ever get, like, universal instantiation into our head? Because even to describe universal instantiation, you have to understand what it means. So that means we can't actually learn universal instantiation. You actually have to already be able to understand beforehand, and so you can't be taught it. And so this is the thing. Where are these ideas coming from? Like, this goes back to Plato. Where are you getting these ideas from? Like, these complex abstract ideas. It's not like, okay, this is like the idea of like something round, you know, like, okay, here's like a quarter and it's round and you can have like the idea of a circle. That's fine, where you can have like the idea of a circle and you can have like a perfect platonic form of a circle in like it's the platonic realm. Where do you get property rights? Like, where do you find them in the world? It's not like you're going to find a property right like you could go find, you know, a round rock or something. So this is difficult. Elsewhere in the account, meanwhile, departures from the rational pursuit of fitness play a crucial role. In earlier work, Strelny described the transition to trans-egalitarian societies as involving a decoupling of fitness and utility. Pleistocene humans, although cognitively capable of pursuing goals that undermine their biological fitness, are unlikely to have done so. Cultural inheritance would have to be mostly vertical, that is, from biological parent to biological offspring, and in such situations, the cultural variants most likely to spread are those that align well with biological fitness. In the Holocene, by contrast, cultural learning runs amok, with the parent-offspring channel as an increasingly minor part of it, and cultural variants that detract from biological fitness can rip through the population, going viral, if they transmit readily enough. Yeah, so now we've started getting memes that may or may not be good for you. As opposed to just like parents teaching their kids. Once you've got a big enough society, you get like memes and other ideas that can do this sort of work. Religious doctrines that justify inequality are posited by Sterelny to have something like this character. Okay, so Sterelny's coming out and saying, like, God's a meme. Like the God meme, basically. And so, and then you just get this. Now that's a hard, just like, okay, we have to accept that. Where would you get evidence that this is the sort of thing that would be transmissible in ancient people's minds? There's nothing like that. Okay, the authors say, they spread because of the prestige of those who promulgate them, shamans and chiefs, even though they are not in the best interest of those who take them up. Okay, so they're saying it's propaganda. That's literally their claim, is that they're using religious propaganda. And the reason they're spreading is because there are people pushing the propaganda. Again, where did the ideas come from to begin with? We don't know, but they're saying, like, once it was there, it could be propagandized. Frank says, I don't know if he needs to explain the creation of things, only that they stabilize once they exist. No, I think they do, because they're making very sophisticated claims. Like, property rights are very sophisticated things, and so it's like, how do you actually get this really sophisticated idea that, like, we use now in, like, the 21st century, and, you know, up until, like, you know, last few, like, 100 years, but how can you say someone, like, 10,000 years ago had that sort of concept? And so it's like, well, you say, well, once it's there, and that's what they said earlier, that they ran simulations, I don't know of what, but it was a very low percentage chance that the two things came along at, like, the same time, that is both property rights and farming. So the authors here mention that it does seem like they do need to have a reason why these things are coming about, because if they don't, yeah. Frank says, I mean that inheritance, once it exists, enables a whole new kind of selection. That's fair. But the idea that, people who produce long-term wealth now have more successful offspring. Yeah, that seems fine. But the idea is that, like, there's, this religious doctrines. I'm not worried about, hey, Maddie, how you been? Welcome in. I'm not worried about people giving stuff to their kids. The idea, like, this is what they're claiming here, is that there's religious doctrines. Yeah. Yeah, so 10,000 years ago would have been right at the birth of agriculture, Maddie says. Even urban areas would need another couple thousand years to start developing. Yeah, see, I'm glad you're here, because I don't really know when they're talking about here. Like, I'm sure the book has more details, because this is Maddie, just so you know, this is a review of a book, and apparently Kim Sterelny, who's a good philosopher, went and, like, talked to a lot of people and was trying to put together a big level picture. But I'm just really, really concerned of this sort of anachronistic use of sort of our concepts that are going back into the way people used to think 1,000 or 5,000 years ago. So it's like, yeah, are there religious doctrines 8,000 years ago? Okay. Were they used as propaganda? I mean, that just seems like it seems tough. And they're used as propaganda, not in the best interest of those who take them up. So they're saying literally that the shamans and chiefs are propagandizing all the people to keep themselves in power. Okay. Continuing. So in this particular domain, early humans are posited. They're just, the authors is claiming this, to be rather poor judges of their fitness interests. This is compatible with them still being rational, of course, because we can think of it as a change to the goal they are rationally pursuing. The goals start to include access to an afterlife, avoidance of divine punishment, and so on. Human goals and values are increasingly untethered from both fitness and reality. Maddie says, one thing to be super careful about is an overly smushing society's culture back then into some monolithic group. Yeah, that's a good point. Even if this was the case, some places it might not work all over the places, and so the proliferation of this sort of stuff, just saying religious doctrines that justify inequality, are just sort of like mimetic and like go throughout all cultures, that doesn't seem to follow. Okay, I think the authors are going to criticize though. The authors say, this leads to a methodological worry about the rules of the game. What are the constraints on postulating changes to the utility functions of early humans, such that they come to pursue goals that oppose their fitness interests? Maddie says there could have been two neighboring cultures that have zero connections or overlap. Yeah, like, that's the thing. It's very strange that this is, these are very strong claims in my opinion. And so, yeah, the authors are saying, like, and why are the people so dumb as to just like give up all their money and power to these rich people? Like, why just this story, why would they believe that? Are they really that stupid back in the day, or are they that stupid compared to the people in power back in the day? I mean, why would they be? I mean, okay. In principle, one could make all puzzles about human social evolution dissolve this way. Yeah. If you're just saying people are dumb, then like people are dumb, and the people who can take advantage of it always win. And it's like, yeah, in principle, one could make all puzzles about human social evolution dissolve this way. Property rights? Well, maybe agents just came to value property rights for their own sake under instruction from the local elites who benefited most from those rights. Yet this feels illicitly ad hoc. It feels like cheating. But then, whatever the source of this intuition of illicitness, surely it is also present when the question is why people acquiesced to elites in the first place. Yeah, I think that's exactly what this is, Maddie. This kind of feels like a rational viewpoint of culture belief development. I think that's exactly what the author was attempting to do. And they said that a little earlier, maybe you weren't here. I think that's exactly what they're trying to do, and they're criticizing, yeah. Well, they said the author did the best probable job that could have been done, but they're poking holes in it now. And so you just brought one up, and they said another one. It says that the whole argument looks ad hoc because you can always say people are stupid and do stupid things, but that's not an explanation. That may be true, but like that doesn't actually explain why and how it happened. Yeah. So they say there's a deep issue here, an issue about how many get out of fitness maximization free cards one has and how they can be played. Yeah, how do you say people just are stupid and doing serving other people for bad reasons? The decoupling of fitness from utility creates a situation where the old rules of adaptationist explanation are being dissolved by the evolutionary process itself, yet the modern rules of economic explanation are not yet fully applicable. In this liminal zone, it is not clear what the rules of explanation are. Yeah, exactly. I don't like these things either. I know a lot of people like them though. But like this is a very good point by these authors. It's like they're postulating that the people were both too stupid back in the day to realize they were being taken advantage of, but yet not so stupid that they are following rational behaviors. Yeah. Well, this is a philosopher. Kim Strelny is a philosopher of biology. They know evolutionary theory. So, like I said, I think they were trying to do the best that can be done and make some sort of rational reconstruction. But again, yeah, I don't like this sort of argumentation generally for this reason that we have brought up in chat and what the authors are saying. I don't think this author is Evo Psych, but maybe he's gone that way. I don't think Strelny has gone that way because this is about Strelny. Yeah, I actually very much doubt Strelny's Evo Psych. They're doing more like Evo Rationality. They made a point earlier saying that they were talking about what it is to be rational back in the day, and they were trying to talk about that. But, you know, you might be right that it's getting really close to evolutionary psychology. Okay. 3. Is cultural group selection too quickly dismissed? At several points in the book, Strelny downplays the importance of cultural group selection, CGS, in which competition between groups drives cultural change. He is skeptical that CGS was a frequent or important force shaping forager life in the Pleistocene. The foragers of the Pleistocene from Homo heidelbergensis onward had sufficient individual level incentives for cooperation between bands, for avoiding conflict between bands, and for de-escalation of conflicts that did arise. And there's little archaeological evidence that would support rampant conflict among populations, at least not until the end of the Pleistocene and the Pleistocene-Holocene boundary. Yeah, I apologize how I say everything. Heidelbergensis. Bergenensis. Okay. Strelny attributes... well, I'm not feeling that bad about it, don't worry. Strelny attributes the greater importance of between-group conflict as the start of the Holocene to the rise of storage, sedentary settlements, property norms, and the accumulation of social capital. These ecological circumstances can feed intergroup conflict because stored foods and later symbolically valued goods and resource-rich ecologies such as maintained fields offer valuable targets for other groups. Yeah, the city of Heidelberg. I figured, but that doesn't mean I can speak. Sorry. Moreover, groups around this time were often, though not always, organized into segmented lineages and clans, the kinds of corporate entities that can mobilize an armed force or raid or seize territories and goods. Yet even in situations that might have favored between group conflict, Strelny remains skeptical of the role of CGS. And CGS is this cultural group selection. So the groups are going to be, like, the groups themselves are going to be selected for having properties. So it's not just any individual, but the groups have selection. Okay. He gives two reasons for skepticism. First, norms, practices, and institutions are not atomistic traits and are thus poor targets for selection. Second, population of groups was too small for CGS to be a powerful force. No, I think maybe you wrote that before I got to this sentence. The things that are selected for in like group selection are like properties of the groups, not a property in terms of like goods, but like a norm or practice, like having certain traits of the groups. Yeah, it's more of a communal trait, not some sort of commodity that they have, that they own. So yeah, it's more of a communal trait. That's what not at because the Strelny saying they're not atomistic traits, and so they can't be selected for because an institution isn't a trait, and that's why group selection is bad under the Strelny's position. Yeah, I'm not surprised. This is a philosophy talk here, but yeah, and I'm sure in archaeology they have probably better ways of describing this. Okay, let's first consider the claim about atomism. The idea is that group-level practices, norms, and institutions are too integrated with each other, too interdependent for selection to be able to shape them efficiently. Integrated sets of group-level practices face selection as a whole, with no room to tweak and improve any particular component part independently of the rest. It is a familiar idea in evolutionary biology that different phenotypic characteristics have to be quasi-independent for selection to tune adaptations effectively. Quasi-independence mean that different characters, though not fully independent, can vary and be selected independently from each other. Strelny, yeah, because like you have to be able to. One change in like your body can't change your whole body. You have to be able to tweak and like improve on things individually. So like your eyes can get better, but that doesn't mess up, say, your liver. Strelny once argued that, for this reason, individual behaviors should not be regarded as adaptations. Selection cannot shape a single behavior without altering the underlying psychological mechanisms that produce it, thereby altering many other behaviors. So it is the psychological mechanisms, not the behaviors, that are the adaptations. 30 years later, he is directing this complaint at social norms and institutions. Yeah. But is it true that social norms and institutions fail the test of quasi-independence? Let us approach this issue indirectly by first considering individual-level cultural products. A bow is in some ways a highly integrated object in that tweaking one aspect, like the length of the string, will tend to undermine the functionality of the whole item unless there are compensating changes elsewhere. So yeah, like to the length of the bow. So if the string is too short, it doesn't work. But cumulative cultural evolution of bows is still possible. This is because the structure of the object is transparent to intelligent agents. It does not take a deep understanding of the structure of the bow to realize that modifying one component necessitates compensating modifications to other components. So we can see how a process of cultural evolution might cumulatively improve a bow, even though a process relying on entirely random changes to individual components might not get very far. Variation is guided just a little bit towards sensible options, and this can compensate for strong interdependence of different components. This suggests that cultural evolution may not always need the same level of quasi-independence as its biological analog. Yeah, this is this whole thing is very high level analogs and metaphors and whatnots. There's good reason to be worried about group evolution and stuff. So they're focusing on what Strelny is saying here, but they're saying, look, can't you at least say that it's kind of like if memes can evolve and be transmitted and adapt, can't groups with properties that are also abstract do similar stuff? Cultural evolution would not really be used as a valid term. Yeah, I agree. But this is using sort of the concepts as being culturally transmitted over time, which is fine. Culture is transmitted over time, and it does change over time. Would it be evolving in the sense of biological evolution? No. But the authors here are saying, look, you kind of have these ideas of what's going on, and some of them can be modified over time. And so the idea that you can't modify ideas over time that are like culturally transmitted, that, like, saying you can't do it full stop, that doesn't seem right either. So this is what they're asking. Might group level traits at least sometimes be as transparent as both? Can't people actually think of the ways to make their life a little bit more like a little bit better? Maddie says, but those ideas can change on a dime and have completely independent reasons for those changes. Yeah, I agree, but they need not. I think that the authors here, like, you're right about that, I think, but they're just saying it doesn't have to change like that, though. You can make things better slowly over time, too. Yeah, so this is what they're saying. Consider rituals. Elite individuals such as shamans might well be aware of the functions, components, costs, and benefits of rituals they have led or witnessed multiple times, such as rituals of group admission to adulthood, male cults, etc., or of social cohesion, dances, or feasts. They are also well placed to modify these rituals in sensible ways that do not destroy their functionality. They might modify myths or narratives to amplify ritual significance or adjust the frequency of such rituals, altering levels of group allegiance and commitment to shared objects. A. Tran has observed this kind of intelligent modification of rituals and myths in the practices underwriting contemporary terrorist groups. Yeah, see, this makes sense. Again, can we attribute this to people thousands of years ago? I don't know. Does this make sense to say about people thousands of years ago? I don't know. But can you do it? Maybe. Maddie is like skeptical face. Okay. Discernment Bugatti. Is it morally reprehensible to have a concubine? By concubine, what exactly do you mean? Like, do you have like a kept person for sex? Do you mean like extra wives or something? Are they like free to come and go? I don't particularly care if like who you're having sex with in general. Now, if you have like some sort of deal with your wife that you're not going to have a lover, then that would be bad in terms of like, or not partner, not wife or whatever. Like if you have a deal with one person not to like go off and have sex with other people, then you're like violating their trusts. Yeah, I mean, try not to violate anyone's trust, but like a friend with benefits, that's go right ahead. I don't care about that. Maddie says it's the same reason why we can't use the modern hunter-gatherer cultures to study past hunter-gatherer cultures. They're completely different on a lot of other variables and issues. Yeah, I agree. Like, this is a very dangerous thing to be attributing contemporary practices back thousands of years. And this has been like the modus operandi. They're saying basically that the people in charge are propagandizing and controlling the people below them using these sorts of like structures. So, Pink Lady, hey, what's up? How you been? And also welcome in Discernment. I haven't seen you in I'm trying to remember last time I saw you. Anyway, but cool. It could be like changing Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos for another super rich man. Yeah, exactly. Like, does that make sense? Like, I don't know if it does. So Discernment, you just pay for her rent and stuff. Look, you're free to give like people whatever gifts you want. Like if you're trading money for sex, that's just generally been around forever, and again, I don't really have a problem with that if everyone is like adults and completely happy with the situation. So yeah, do I care about that? If everyone's cool with the situation, then if you're all adults like of sound mind, go have like fun and do whatever you want. If like people are being mistreated or someone's being misled, then that's bad generally. But other than that, if like you're all adults and like everyone's happy with it, then I don't have any problem with adults being happy with the way they set up their lives. Like, this doesn't bother me. It's like, I guess like the problem here for your Discernment Bugatti is the contemporary culture does not look well upon that. It's usually one man and one woman in like this sort of Judeo-Christian psychosis, in the United States, and if you get away from that, but that's like terribly heteronormative. Like it's very yeah, it's just very simplistic on like human relationships. So it's like if that's gonna work for you and all the people involved, even for a little while. I'm not even saying it has to last forever. Just like if everyone's happy with like the way things are right now, it's like that should be good. As long as you're not doing any like long-term damage and no one's getting messed up. Like seriously, it's fine by me. Yeah. Pink Lady 90 says, my question would be how these elites can measure the effects of these changes over those myths and rituals. Well, that I'm actually okay with here. I'm gonna assume people are smart in this one instance. People, and how can they be aware when they do need to change? I'm gonna assume that people are actually smart and have some idea of what they're doing sometimes, and like that's it. Now, are the ideas we are attributing to them, is that what's going on in their heads? I have no idea, and I think that's very dubious. Do the people have some idea what's going on in their lives? I'm gonna say yeah. And so I don't know if we can call them elites or like, and they understand like that they're in charge and this is really keeping them in charge of these like myths, but I'm not going to call them stupid either and say they don't have any idea what's going on. Viper says it's not heteronormative or religious, it's practical. Have you met people? Do you really want to have a closer relationship with more than one? Well, that's the big if on this one, Vipers. Like, discernment seems to be happy with their current setup or the idea of their current setup. If they are lucky enough to find a group of people that like them, and then more power to Discernment Bugatti. I don't know how to make that work for myself yet. Other people are smarter than me quite often in figuring out how to be happy. So yeah. It's like one of those, if you can pull it off and everyone's happy, go for it. It's like I don't know how myself. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So, but this is the thing. Can all this work at all at any time? Like all this like sort of this group selection where people are actually modifying the groups in some way? Maybe, but it's a stretch. I agree. This is a stretch. So authors say religion seems a good target for group selection, cultural group selection. Recent work has stressed religion's role as a flexible, ecologically sensitive, and adaptive evolutionary system with variety in ritual costs, context, timing, and intensity, as well as the domains, knowledge, and intentions of supernatural beings varying with socio-ecological circumstance. Wow, that's a sentence. More generally, I'd say the communities here on Twitch are evolving based on, the streamer and what they think is good for the community. You could actually make a better argument that like Twitch communities, maybe not religion, maybe this is like maybe Toad stream or something is good for religion, or Bible Boys Church, one of those things where they're probably, or maybe closer to Bible Boys. I don't watch Bible Boys much. It's like beyond my mind, what I can understand. But like the idea that you can modify your stream or the shows you watch here on Twitch get modified over time to like grow with the community and like have new content. Like how do you actually do that? And like the things that like the community members do in order to like interact with the streamer, that's the sort of thing we're talking about here. I think this would make way more sense in terms not ritual costs, but like what's it called, channel point costs, not emotes, timing and intensity, knowledge, who knows the inside jokes, which emotes are to be used when, all sorts of stuff like that, like how much things you can buy for bits, all sorts of stuff. So if you think of this much more in terms of like a Twitch community, yeah, religion maybe. Can people do this? Maybe they do know this, but like I think much more on the local level here on Twitch, you can see these sorts of things where you've got like channel point redeems, bit redeems, and all the sort of complex interactions you can have with the streamer nowadays. Like that makes a difference, and like that can be tweaked on the fly by a high quality streamer, better than me. That would be. Okay. There's also ethnographic evidence suggesting that periods of ritual innovation and invention occur during periods of strife and conflict. Yeah, I mean, all the people went to Twitch during the pandemic, and so all these sort of like innovations were happening at that time. Okay, so the ingredients are in place for religion to be, as Persiski and Sosis describe it, an adaptive system where each of its each of its constituent parts comprises an ever-changing adaptive amalgam of concepts and behaviors. This is a picture of religion as a medium in which pro-social practices, conventions, and norms can be tweaked and optimized without uncontrolled knockoff effects on other components. Different doctrines and rituals can be adjusted independently of each other, perhaps with some compensating adjustments. Yeah, you wonder what research that was? Well, I mean, you can grab the paper yourself if you want, and you can look at the list. But like, yeah, this is this Przewski and Sosa. It looks like, 2022. So these just came out. You're totally buying this thesis. You know, this is like, I think Przewski and Sosa. Like, this is a recent thesis. Like, this one may be okay, but like the way it's being used is to show that maybe the way Strelny is setting up their society is wrong. Frank says, I think calling it tweaked and optimized instead of just tweaked is slightly sideways. Fair. Optimized implies a value judgment that it's getting better. Tweaked can be, people are just testing something. Absolutely. Yeah, Frank, I think you got a nail on the head on that. That was overstated by whoever said optimized. I think you're absolutely right. The elites don't have the ability to predict the effects of change, just make a change. Yeah, just tweaked. The optimized is overstated. So, okay. But you can see, actually, the authors are, it says they're going to say fine-tune it again, which is a value judgment, to make it more in tune with whatever they need it to be. So that is, again, maybe overstating the claim here. Okay, so these are reasons to think group-level traits may be easier to fine-tune sufficiently independently of each other. So they're just saying, the authors aren't actually saying that, like, it is getting better, but, like, you have the opportunity to do it. So you can try. Okay. But making a change that goes against them would be weird. Well, mistakes happen, Pink Lady. I think that's all Frank's saying, is that mistakes can be made, mistakes were made. And so the idea that you are inherently optimizing is... you optimize over time, but you're not always optimizing. You're just tweaking. And you tweak one thing, and if it works, good. If it doesn't, you have to go back. Okay, so and more likely be cumulatively improved through group selection than Strelny suggests. So you might be able to do this. But what about the second reason for skepticism, population size? The thought here is that populations of groups around this time were too small to support powerful cultural group selection. Population size matters for multiple reasons. One is that the smaller the population, the less likely it is that beneficial changes to existing structures will arise. I think Maddie mentioned this point too. It's that these things can change too quickly, and in a small group, it won't be stable enough. So you can't actually be tweaking it because it will be too institutionally weak to actually be improving because it'll change too quickly. Although detailed modeling would be needed to seriously investigate this concern, it may be slightly mitigated by our comments above. For if the structure of the relevant norms and institutions is reasonably transparent, and if elite individuals have substantial power to make small adjustments, adaptive variations may arise a lot more frequently than they would in biological evolution, potentially allowing cultural group selection to generate cumulative adaptation in smaller populations. Yeah, but this is all hand-waving, but like, that's fair. Okay, seasonal and permanent inequality. So, all right, so they're saying, look, this is again against Strelny's thing that, look, they had this big rational story, and this is a counter argument to that, but I don't think it actually goes farther than that. It just is saying you could do this in a different way that Strelny says. Pigley says, also, does this mean that we, the common people, have no power whatsoever to change anything? Well, this was touched on earlier when they were saying that this is assuming all the common people are stupid and that, like, the elites can just propagandize willy-nilly. And they said that doesn't really make sense either. That was the thing over here. That's this. This was the conclusion of section 2, where they were started to criticize that sort of thing. They said, look, Kim Strelny is assuming that common people really can't change anything, and that's a bad assumption. And they pointed that out earlier. Then it's fine, and like, feel free to ask questions. But like, yeah, they did. They thought of that. that it just doesn't seem to make sense that people are going to be so easily swayed by fancy ideas that like, oh yeah, we'll just give you all of our like food and we're going to work like idiots in the field because we're going to, get to heaven, and like that's just going to boom, done. Okay, Maddie says no, cultural changes happen a lot, large or small. I believe it. And so, all right. So maybe they do have problems with the institutional changes being assuming too much stability. So cultural changes happen a lot. Maybe they do need to account for more instability in the system. I just don't know this, so I thank you for the input. Okay, seasonal and permanent inequality. Strelny's book has landed at a moment of unusually heated discussion about the origins of inequality, a debate ignited by Graeber and Wengrow's controversial book, The Dawn of Everything. Here's an open example if you want it. Yeah, put it in chat. You can always look at it, or not, but whatever. Graeber and Wengrow's central thesis is that there was no origin of inequality or transition to inequality as such. Ivan Neo, are you streaming music in your background? I am. It's this is the stuff, my music I stream. Viper says, I actually brought that question up in Aris's chat yesterday. What does it mean to be a moral agent in a democracy that is detached from the global economy and all the exploitation that facilitates our democratic lifestyle? Was that the thing? It's like, are we really in Discord? Oh, I haven't looked at Discord enough. I'm sorry, but yeah, I hope you like the music, Ivan Neo. There's the link. Welcome in. Feel free to. This is what I do. I read philosophy and we discuss. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not entirely sure. Like, what do you mean? What does it mean to be a moral agent in a democracy that is detached from the global economy? Like, what's the problem here? Like, yeah, you're trying to be do stuff locally then, and then if you're detached from the global economy, it's gonna cause problems, because how do you actually get detached? There is no detachment nowadays unless you go really off into the middle of nowhere, and then you're still gonna get like problems eventually, but still. And so if you're worried about the exploitation that facilitates our democratic lifestyle, well, any sort of modern lifestyle is gonna create terrible problems for both the natural environment and poor people on the other side of the world, because that's where all of our trash goes. I know. So, yeah. Viper says, like, we have no ability to change injustices outside of our country, but benefit from them. Yeah, like where we do, well, I know there's places out in the Pacific in like Asia or whatever that why is my shoulder all messed up? That basically have suffered terribly because of all the trash we dump into the ocean. And so they're suffering from like rising seas and oceans, and we're making a mess of like their very nice beaches, like, so their natural stuff. And so what does it mean to be a moral agent? Well, we can definitely work to change how our government deals with those other countries. We can work to, make laws, I guess, that prevent us from doing stupid things like that. But, yeah, we've inherited a very, very, like, colonial system where it didn't matter what people in the other parts of the world thought or how they lived. And so we have to undo that somehow to make the world a bit better place. I'm not entirely sure. It's like, yeah, do we owe them like money or something, like reparations for all the shit we fucked up? Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it's like we're gonna have to work to make the world a lot healthier for everyone, and it's gonna take a while. Frank says, capitalism seems to deal with externalities very poorly. Yes, it does. It does not care about anything except for capital. That's why it's capitalism. How do you get the money, and then how do you use the money to do more money, to make more money? Yeah, Cobalt, out of sight, out of mind. And that's why we moved all the manufacturing overseas, and we don't make as much stuff here in the United States, because a lot of it was, screwing up the environment. And so out of sight, out of mind, other people are getting lung disease and not us. Maddie Holmes says, so cultural used to be patrilineal, where families would go down along their father's family lines. One guy in that culture went to prison for quite a long time, and when he got out, the culture had flipped to matrilineal, and that was in one generation. Yeah, see, that's seems very shocking at that point, but okay. Again, that's one instance. I'd have to see if like is that how common is like that sort of major flip, that sort of thing. Like how common is that stuff, or are these things generally stable for long enough periods that people can modify them, even if they can flip like every few generations? Can people make them better and better and better for whoever they're trying to make it better for? Can you actually do that over the course of maybe a few generations? Because even if you can do it over maybe like 60, 70, 80, 100 years, maybe that would be worth it. And maybe some things do last longer. So I guess maybe the question then would be, what counts as proper cultural evolution? Something that can't flip is going to just be defining yourself out of the problem, but then there may be things that like fall into this category of things that really do last for a long time. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. There's lithium, not just cobalt, lithium, all sorts of things we like to dig up that kill us. Cobalt is one of them. Lithium, like if it ever gets out, it explodes. We have here in New York a lot of problems with exploding batteries for scooters. And it's causing a lot of fires around the city because people buy these, scooters to go around on their bikes, but like they're crappy. Some of them are crappy quality. And then all of a sudden we're having exploding lithium batteries in, old buildings, and they're like causing all these fires, and it's bad. Okay. Anyway, so do I know how to solve capitalism? No, I'm not that clever. Is it a problem? Should we do something about it? Yes. Do I know what to do? No. I'm sorry. I read stuff and I poke holes in it. That's what I know how to do. Yeah, out of sight, out of mind. Well, you try not to make it all out of sight and out of mind. You try to at least have some understanding of what you're doing. Yeah, I think that's... Try to at least have some understanding of what you're doing. Try. You think the main problem is the decoupling of democracy from capitalism? I actually think you're right there. I think a lot of times things were better in the United States. I think I say this quite often. Things were better here in the United States when the Soviet Union was around, because that forced the government to actually make capitalism work for the people, to at least so that because they were afraid that like the people would be communist to get like more of like the stuff for themselves. And so when the Soviet Union was around and the government was afraid of like the people wanting the things that you could get under socialism, that's exactly like they gave more stuff to the people. But now that fear is taken away, and so capitalism has run amok, and then democracy is just like, it doesn't matter anymore. They're just letting everything go free. Frank Big Time says most capitalists consider the free market almost sacred, but perfect or near perfect market condition information is absolutely critical to good markets. So concealing externalities is super anti-capitalistic, but they do it anyway. No, and that's the thing. There is no like perfect market. It doesn't work in the textbooks. It's way too abstract to actually work well like it's supposed to. It never did. It's never going to. It doesn't even make sense to think that like there's going to be a perfect market, because that's just not like, you're dealing with people and the world. That's never going to be an abstract thing like you need in like abstract economics. It's just not going to work. It makes no sense. So and that's the thing. And then as soon as you get the power yourself, then you get to change the system, and you can like conceal things and make sure that you gain it. And so the idea that there's like perfect information for all the parties involved is never going to happen. And so this is why you can't listen to all the like hardcore capitalists that say, oh no, like, free markets like never was free. It's never going to be free because of this problem with information like control. Anyway. Yeah. Okay, so what we're actually talking about is there is no origin of inequality or transition to it. Hey, Rethius, how you been? Ivan Neo says, I think the more responsible behavior during the Cold War may have had different origins. Culturally, companies used to pride themselves on the benefits they provided to workers. Well, why? Why did the companies have that? But I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just don't know. Because like they were saying, oh, we take care of our people, and these are our people, and we're gonna help them. Yeah, I don't know. Like I know at least on the U.S. government side, like you might be right. I might be talking about something that was a minor factor, but I know on the government side it was a cultural thing that the U.S. government was actively trying to make our lives, the lives of the citizens, at least think that their lives were better than it was in the Soviet Union as a propaganda thing. And so they pushed like lots of nice stuff. Like they paid artists to make art. Like they paid for museums and stuff. So Rethia says before the early 1900s in union wars, they didn't give a single fuck about workers. Okay, yeah, so that at least tracks with what I was saying in terms of time. Yeah, but like, yeah, I'm not. You need like a proper historian. Like Shane would probably correct me, but yeah, I was like, you need a proper historian to tell you about this stuff. But I do know there was a program that like, because they were afraid. The U.S. government was afraid that people would like the Soviet way better. And so they tried to actively promote stuff. Viper says, yep, you load 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older, another and deeper in debt. St. Peter, you don't call me because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Yep. Yeah. To the USA, yeah. I'm always USA centric. I'm not very good at world history. I'm not even good at our history. Yeah. The Iowa workshop again, supported by the CIA. Yeah, the Iowa writing workshop. Yeah, that was one of the things I knew about the Iowa workshop, writing workshop. I knew about that one. They paid for a lot of artists, like painters and stuff, to have funding so that they could go paint, things like that. That was a CIA program. Yep. So, and that was like I think post-war. Jackson Pollock. Yeah, that may be. I don't remember. Rethia says, some people say a man is made out of mud, a poor man is made out of muscle and blood and muscle and blood and skin and bone, a mind that's weak and back that's strong. Yeah. It's like, this is the history of the U.S. It was basically abusing people, whoever they could, until they had needed the big bad guy, the Soviet Union came, and then they changed your tune for a bit. But now we're getting back to just the grinding everybody down. It's like, remember when at the beginning of the pandemic and they gave us all a little bit of money and it was nice? They can afford to do that again if they wanted to. It's just gonna get worse at this point. Don't know what it was. While you were chatting, I was checking out the dawn of everything, and it seemed very interesting. Okay, yeah, like this seems like this is something new that they're talking about here. Maddie says the first Red Scare was post World War One, and they really started cracking down hard in the 30s. Okay, yeah, so 30s. It wasn't afterwards, but yeah. Oh yeah, they on labor rights. Yeah, cracking down on hard on that stuff. Okay. Yeah, so that's the whole thing. It's like it was part of like the 20th century history, at least in the United States. Okay, so this thing from the dawn of everything is rather humans in prehistory were continuously trying out different forms of social organization at different times and in different places, with some temporary forms of inequality and hierarchy existing at least as far back as 40,000 years ago. Rethia says, did you see the South Park bit where they showed Butters' dad working at an Amazon factory and suffering, and eventually coming home to an Amazon package that his son is stoked about? It plays that song the entire time. I did not see that. I haven't watched South Park in a while, but that does seem on point. Alright, so this theory, I guess, the dawn of everything, is that people were just randomly trying stuff, and then I guess it wasn't that like there's this like overarching narrative like Strelny was saying, but like that it's just like they were trying it, and maybe some of them stuck over time. Yeah, Graeber and Wengrow argue for a reconfiguring of the traditional puzzle. It is not is not one of how inequality arose, but one of how we got stuck in one particular highly unequal form of social life when human communities had previously been able to move fluidly between different forms of political organization. Yeah, so I guess that makes sense. If we were just trying out lots of stuff, and why did this one stick more than the other ones? I don't know if that's actually going to solve the problem, but like it does seem a little different. Author says it would be fascinating to hear Stervelny's reaction to that book. We naturally wondered, are the differences between Stervelny's big picture and Graeber and Wengrow's alternative just differences of emphasis, or is something deeper at stake? Here is one possible point of disagreement. Stervelny stresses how ecological factors contributed, alongside domestication and storage technology, to a reasonably robust transition from forager ways to trans-egalitarian societies. The transition passes through an intermediate stage, storage foraging. We mentioned earlier as one of the enabling conditions for the evolution of inequality. Storage foraging is likely when there is predictable and large seasonal variation in resource availability, abundant resources in the high season, a seasonal spike that can be harvested efficiently, and a seasonal surplus that can be stored with low wastage and little risk. Yeah, full squirrel hide our nuts. That's right. Graeber and Wengrow, meanwhile, give various examples from ethnography in which seasonal surpluses lead to seasonal, not permanent, inequality or hierarchy. Their examples include the Inuit, the the Kwakiutl of the Pacific Northwest, and Plains nations such as Lakota and Crow. You just Googled it, and interesting, the Wikipedia article for Iowa Writers Workshop contains no reference to the CIA. They may have funded it. They may not have done much else. Like, they may have just slipped them some money. But this is a known thing where the CIA funded a bunch of things in the United States that were culturally, that they thought would boost our cultural cachet to make it look like we were the more culturally superior place than the Soviet Union. What was it called? They had this sort of Russian realism, and they were very actually afraid of like this art movement that was the real like Russian realism or something, and they wanted like to show greater freedom here, and so they funded abstractionist art or something. Oh, interesting. The Google results of the That's amazing, Vipers. Okay, so somebody in the government wiped the Wikipedia page. Good to know. So Rethia says, so Lakota and Crow historically didn't have super huge worries about the how do we get fed problem. Oh, thank you for the link, Maddie. Okay, yeah. Well, we have to see. I haven't gotten to where they say what the point of bringing up the Lakota and the Crow are. All right. So these populations experience seasonal abundance in foodstuffs such as the large salmon runs in the Pacific Northwest and the seasonal migration of buffalo through the interior of what is now the United States and Canada. These resources are harvested and surpluses are stored. For instance, there is well-documented evidence of the food storage techniques of the Pacific Northwest nations, who relied on a broad spectrum of resources preserved through fermentation, drying, smoking, and salting. And similar techniques supported the buffalo hunting nations like the Lakota, who stored various game meats through drying, smoking, and preservation in fat. Frank says, imagine different geographies experience very, very different transitions from hunting to farming. Oh, absolutely. But I mean, there's going to be a point at which things can do. Usually people are not, you can just say get on with it, but like, yeah, I'm not usually this interrupted, which is fine. I don't mind being interrupted, really. Maddie says, did the CIA fund creative writing in America? The idea seems like the invention of a creative writer. Yet once upon a time, 1967, they did this. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I knew of this. But yeah. No. I knew it. It was just I was looking at what it said. So, okay. What we see in these cases, says Graeber and Wengrow, are seasonal inequalities and hierarchies. For example, during buffalo runs, the otherwise small and mobile bands of Lakota adopted unequivocal authoritarian tactics, appointing a group of warriors to act as police. These warriors would enforce norms related to the buffalo drive, punishing those who hunted clandestinely and beyond, suppressing war parties, directing mass movement, and other maintaining law and order. After the hunt, and especially during the winter months, the Lakota would return to smaller units that lacked such a disciplinary organization. More generally, Graeber and Wengrow argue that many elements of social organization can vary seasonally. The precise changes in organizational form might differ from population to population, but extend beyond shifts in population size and the nature of authority. Populations may have different laws, rituals, social protocols, and even individual names from one season to the next. Graeber and Wengrow write that the archaeological evidence is piling up to suggest that in the highly seasonal environment of the last ice age, our remote ancestors were behaving much like the Inuit, Nambikwara, or Crow. They look at some of the examples discussed by Strelny, such as the Gobekli Tepe in Turkey, and argue that they point towards seasonal rather than permanent inequality. Yeah, I agree. It seems like a lot of common sense, but pointing out that these things may be seasonal is an important thing when you're saying to contrast with people who are giving an overarching story, saying, well, maybe this has to do with more seasonality than some long causal structure. But I think that's what the authors are doing here, Retheus. They're trying to point out that there's another way of describing stuff. Yeah, and yeah, of course, Maddie, it doesn't have to ever align with what we think of as common sense now. Yeah, or how we view it. Absolutely. Graeber and Wengrow's broader argument is that ecological and demographic conditions are not, in ethnography or prehistory, determinative of political organization. Yeah, see, this is where I thought they were going. They're now widening the point. They're saying you just can't use this to determine political organization. It doesn't make sense, because some people do it for a bit and then they stop. Okay, we should instead recognize our ancestors as having deliberately experimented with different subsistence and organizational forms, moving fluidly between different options. Though organizational form might vary with the seasons, this did not mean that the ecologically determined ritual, governance, or social... that the ecologically determined ritual, governance, or social protocols. Yeah, it didn't always go those either. As they see it, the transition to sedentary agriculture, larger cities, and large but efficiently managed population sizes was far from robust. Vipers always pronounced it Inuit, and every time someone corrects me, I'm like, I knew it! Hilarious. Hilarious. Okay. The case for reading this as a difference of emphasis is that... I'm sorry I didn't laugh at your joke, Vipers. Well, yeah, I agree, Maddie. It took a long time to figure out urban living and how to do it well, and I'm not sure we've got that down yet. Yeah. Viper's busting out the dad jokes. The case for reading this as a difference of emphasis is that Strelny only regards ecological and demographic factors as enabling conditions for the evolution of inequality. They make it possible. They do not guarantee it. Graeber and Wengrow might agree. Pink Lady says, but wait a minute. Maybe I didn't understand it well, but their examples were based on comparing the social structures in different seasons. Yeah, they're saying that it's not that they're comparing them. They're saying they're comparing that to this overarching narrative that this is how society's evolved. But if there are peoples that are just doing something for a bit and then going to something else and then coming back and doing something else, depending on the time of the year, it makes less sense to have one overarching causal narrative structure saying we went from this and then we moved on to this and then we moved on to this and that's how we ended up here now. No, here's why I can never have a stand-up comedy career. Eventually I'll have to play New York and I'll be sitting in the back row with blank face and arms folded. Yeah, no. I mean, there's always going to be grumpy people like me, and philosophers tend to be grumpy. So it's yeah. I mean, you're just talking about an old grumpy curmudgeon. So, I mean, people like me don't go to comedy, or I should go to comedy shows, lighten the mood. But it's yeah. I'm in the minority here. So you don't have to worry about me. Okay. Moreover, one need not see seasonal variation in organizational form as being in tension with the broader ecological story told by Strelny. if the seasonal variation has ecological drivers. Okay, so they're saying this could be two separate things. You could have people who are just doing one thing and they're moving forward in it, and other peoples are just going back and forth between stuff. But at least there is but there is at least the hint of a deeper disagreement too, insofar as Stervelny does not regard it as a doomed project to look for generalizable and robust mechanisms for generating and stabilizing inequality and hierarchy, mechanisms not specific to any particular time or place, and he clearly thinks ecological and demographic factors will be an important part of any such mechanisms. Graeber and Wengrow might disagree. This relates back to one of our earlier reflections. One response to these examples of seasonal inequality is to postulate that norms of land ownership and land inheritance may be even more central to the stabilization of permanent inequality than Stervelny's account suggests. It is not storage foraging by itself that sets the transition in motion. It is really the idea of ownership that persists through the seasons and across generations, that allows inequality to bed in permanently. Rethius asks, did I miss an argument against tribalism being an early human social structure? No. I don't think that was a focus of this. They were kind of assumed that you were going through like sort of different little groups, and so it wasn't an argument. They were saying the question was, how do we get to like social inequality? And so they're saying, look, that was part of it, but they're trying to figure out how it actually arose in tribal situations, not that it was the tribalism. It's like, how did the tribes get that way to begin with? Okay, and yet, as the authors pointed out earlier, Stervelny's picture and the modeling work he cites leaves the origin of ownership norms rather mysterious. Yeah, this is the whole problem here. The mystery can be partially, though not wholly, diminished if we are willing to posit a form of cultural group selection powerful enough to favor both investment in land and social norms that support claims of ownership. To V. Gordon Childa. I don't know enough about that. Sorry, Maddie. I don't know who Gordon Childa is. But yeah, Pink Lady, this is the thing. This contemporary idea of like land ownership and who controls like the important things in the area, but like that is the whole point. How do we get to that spot? And so if you posit that there's land ownership, then you've already given up the game, because those people who are landed, then you're gonna have the people who own all the land, and they're going to those are going to be the elites. But that was the question: how do you explain that to begin with? So this is the whole thing, that both groups are trying to figure out how this happens, and they don't actually have a story here. Yeah. Passive influence by having the best house. Yeah, but again, but why? How is anyone getting to hold onto their house when other people can come and just take it from you? What is the idea that's keeping them there? And that's the whole idea of this sort of ownership, that like people have the idea, oh, that's his house. It's like, nah, maybe I can just take your house. So Ivan Neo says, origin of ownership seems intuitive. If I'm laboring on a plot, I'm going to fight like it's mine. No, you're speculating. See, this is the problem, Ivan. You can't just assume that our ideas now about you laboring on your plot, on a plot, gives you any right to it. That the idea, like our thoughts about this are already informed by our, culture and our history, and having like the living in the society we do now. So just because it's intuitive now does not mean it was intuitive 10,000 years ago in a completely different world. So yeah, that is kind of where these people are coming from. Can't we speculate? But like, it's just fantasy unless you can back that up. Rithia says, I think the idea is built in believing in civilization and law protecting your claims about ownership. Yeah, but where does it come from, Rithia? And that was part of like the original question at the beginning. Yeah, there was some Pink Lady. I'm sure there was lots of violence in the past. Completely sure about that. Frank says, or even if you have the right, nothing justifies ownership transferring to your kids. Yeah, I mean, again, that's a different thought. That's completely right. Why, just because you are there and maybe people respect you, why do your offspring inherit your stuff? Like, why does that make sense? Where did the idea of inheritance come from? You like Child, he created a lot of the original understandings of different socio-political structures and their development into more urban complex cultures. Interesting, cool, things I don't know enough about. Rithia says that goes away when the enforcement of your claim goes away. Yeah, So it's like, but who's enforcing it? And why did they think it was even something enforceable? Okay, so you don't think it's abstract, just intuitive. Yeah, but always ask, what do you mean by intuitive? Always. Like, why do you think certain things are intuitive to yourself? And I'm not attacking you here, Ivan. I don't mean to be attacking you. But, like, anytime you think something just like that just follows, why? Why? Like, think about why. Viper says, I get it. People want their own work. If we replace the word land with something much more general like matter, then people feel ownership of the matter attached to their work. Again, this is like modern concepts, like contemporary concepts. I am less certain that what we're saying now actually made sense back in the day. It's like, why do we think that follows? And I agree that like you feel like, okay, I went out and I killed that thing. I need to eat, and so I'm gonna eat now. But like, do I actually get all of that, or like what's like that is sharing not something that's fundamental? I don't know. Again, you're saying, Ivan says, because humans naturally compete for status as well as survival, just like chimps and rhesus macaques. The problem here in this paper is I'm not saying, of course, people are not competing for whatever there is to be had. It's just how did it get, the question here is not that we're competing. It's like how did it get set up to create like laws to enforce this thing? And of course there's like competition. No one's disagreeing with the competition. It's that, but who's enforcing property rights? And how did somebody get the idea of property rights to then support their material status? Like it's a big jump from saying like I'm the best to no, there are laws out there saying I'm the best. And that's why they also talked about, I don't know if you heard, they're saying like, did the religious and political leaders of the time then set this up to say, oh no, I am God ordained to be like in charge, and that's why you should all like respect what I have to say. But like, how did anyone come up with those ideas? Like, that's a big jump in idea to say, okay, where's competition, to then say there's some external structure in the universe, like an idea of property rights or like some God that is favoring me. So it's a big difference there. Rithia says, if you buy a house in LA and some stranger runs in, you can call the LAPD to come and pull them out by force because you have that piece of paper that says this is mine. Yeah, you get your house, your deed to your house. If there is an apocalypse in the support structure, like the cops just aren't there, then it becomes a question of might makes right. We're civilized because we have enforcers. Maybe this is cynical. No, this is like the contemporary society. There's like you can call the cops in like places where there are no cops. Then you can't call them. You have to actually like pay people to enforce them, or enforce it yourself. That's fine. But like, where did these ideas come from that you could like have a society set up to protect what you own? Like, what is the idea that like you can just have that's like the job of society or whatever? Where did that idea even come from? Frank says, I can compete for status by gradually working to earn more property, yes, but it can also get by taking property by force. Yeah. Ivan Neo says, we are all tending to the same field and sharing this bounty, then there is no obvious incentive, but if we split up and tend to our own little plots, we are competing for status. If someone steals my crop, I want to team with another farmer to enforce my rights. Once we have this structure, it is de facto law. But yeah, again, they discuss that, but like, it's not that clear that this is going to last more than like just your temporary truce with that other farmer. And so the idea that like these ideas are going to, that's what they were talking about, cultural group selection. Will these ideas get built into the structure of the groups? And is that even a feasible way that this can happen? Like, we don't know if that can even work. They had to do some hand-wavy argument to say that this could happen. And so it's like, that's the idea. It's like, yeah, you can partner with somebody else and then you can have more stuff if you partner with these people. But how long is that going to last? If you need things to last for more than like just you and the your partner farmer like protecting your stuff, there needs to be a society that has like stable laws. And that is way more sophisticated than having a de facto law just between you. Like a de facto, you don't have a de facto law, you have a de facto contract. Pink Lady asks, how come we accept property? I have no idea. Like, we've got, this is just how our society is. I can't quite take. Rethia, I'd love to hear your takedown of the idea of money in general. Okay. That's just the root of all bullshit. Yeah, well, it's the root of all evil, as the bugs in our species. Yeah. Maddie says a lot of, I'll think, I don't know if I have anything good to say. It's like one of these big concepts of Retheus. Money is, of course, like I've been looking at the crypto stuff like everyone else has over the last few years, and so I've got a few things to say, but I'll get back to that. Maddie says a lot of hunter-gatherer communities had their own territories and land ranges that they owned and kept other groups off. Ownership, this is mine, not yours, has been around a long time. That's fair, yeah. But the question is, how is that getting enshrined? But yeah, I believe that. And they were saying that this is one of the old, they mentioned that here also when they said that basically there were two ways of going about it. You can have always just default to the people that are there, and that will solve the problem of fighting, because fighting is extremely costly. So if you default like to just like 9/10 of the laws, like who has it, you just default to them, and that solves most of the problems. And to keep down fighting, because fighting is massively costly. And so it's like, yeah, that's been around. But again, how does it get more sophisticated than just, well, I'm here now and you aren't? Rethia says humanity needs a sense of ownership at a base level. You need to own yourself. You can go into Carl Sagan concepts. Yeah. But again, like then you have to talk about ideas of self from back in the day, and even that is not what like it is like a contemporary sense. Like in the Western societies, we have a much different sense of like identity than like even other like Eastern societies. So it doesn't even like translate across the globe at the moment. Frank says, I think we have ownership because society works better with ownership than without, but it's not particularly rigorous or justified. No, I think that's the whole point, is that this is how we've organized our society, and this is what's worked somewhat well. I don't know if it's going to continue to work well, but it just has worked somewhat well. Rethia says, I speak from purely functional in the tech sector in the late 30s in the USA. I'm right there with you, but I'm not in the tech sector, but like, yeah, like basically similar stuff. Like this is like all I'm looking at too. Yeah, I mean, money, capitalism, the structure of stuff. Again, like all I can talk about is like contemporary capitalism in the United States, basically, because this is what I look at. But it's like capitalism supports those who have money. If you don't have any money, you're just fucked. And so it's like, what are we doing to? Why should that be the case? I don't know. And so the idea of money, like there's always been some sort of money, but like again, who has all of it and who controls it? Those are the people in power, and like who control the money and the power, and a lot of times the money is equated with power. Those are the people in charge, and so that's the thing. So you can't. It's just you can like look whose face is on your money, basically. Vipers found a PDF from Harvard Law, Chapter 7, The Concept of Property. It name drops Locke, Hume, and Hegel in the intro. I haven't read it, but I think I'll link it in Discord, sure. And as always, let's see. Where's my socials? Yeah, so if anyone wants to get into the socials, it's there. There is an argument to be made that in the West, a lot of our current rights and the theory was done by sort of like philosophers to stop, like the reason it got pushed was because it supported the wealthy people of the day. Like, so the idea that like the property rights was very well received because it was written to support the like ruling class of the time, and has continued to be like that. And so it's like, is this the property rights theory we want to have that has actually been basically supporting the status quo from way back when it was written to begin with? Dario Maestripieri has written a book called Machiavellian Intelligence, How Rhesus Macaques and Humans Have Conquered the World. He argues that while many species fight directly over new resources, we primates fight for status. When resources show up, high status individuals simply get the resources. That's like, I'm not completely sure like that's right. Why should the high status people just get them? It's usually people who have guns have gotten them in the past. Now, maybe the guns have different, they look different now, like people who control the media, who have a lot of money, power, political pull, things like that. But I'm not sure, like, I get the idea that it's inherently status. That's all. Like, we fight for something, and then like those who have power do it. But I maybe we're just arguing semantics here, so I'd have to see what the actual argument is, Ivan. But it seems like an interesting stuff. Yeah, but like that's my question, Pink Lady. What is high status? Is just like high powered. Yeah, Yeah, Vipers, go ban everybody. Go right ahead. So, Ivan, thank you. Thank you for the bits, Ivan. Let's see. Oh, is it gonna read it out? It did not read it out. Sometimes it reads out stuff. Appreciate it though. Thank you for the bits. Yeah. So that's it for this paper. I don't know if I have anything more to say. Again, there were a whole bunch of like problems towards the beginning, and how are we getting these ideas to begin with? Like, how did it ever get in? It's a chicken and the egg problem. We're not solving this chicken and the egg problem. It's either these are like just so stories. You have to accept them, but once you have this sort of property stuff and all that, then you can start making these like wider stories of how society got the way it is. Frank Big Time says maybe status is a proxy for power. I think that's exactly how I was seeing it. Frank continues, if we were willing to fight over the new resource, lots of us would die, so we maintain a complex map of who has what power status, so we at least don't have to kill one another every time there are new resources. No, I think that's what it is in the end. It's just a concept of power, and maybe status is a good way of describing it, but again, I don't know what the actual argument is. So it's like, you just gotta... I would default to the generic power talk myself, so that, like, you know, that basically people will understand that. You want to do a paper about morality combined with biology? All right, we can look at that. Retheus Pinkley says theory will not save us. We need to become high status individuals. Well, yeah, I mean, it's very hard to, like, moving social classes nowadays is hard. There's some sort of class warfare constantly. It's like tough. Sapolsky already wrote a book. Yeah, we've talked about Sapolsky. Yeah, Ivan says status is complex. Sometimes it's power, physical strength. Yeah, so okay. I guess that's what it is. They're using status as a blanket term, an umbrella for a lot of other stuff, and that's fair. Like, I mean, that makes sense. But the idea is we fight continuously. There is a question about that, Ivan. Like, is that really what we do? You can talk about how we interact with each other in lots of different ways. Are we always fighting continuously? Aren't we sometimes trying to get along in your family and society? When it's not always a fight. And so this always this comes down to an argument that maybe this is just capitalism in another form, saying that we're always fighting. And it's like, is that really what's going on? Or is it just assuming capitalism at a fundamental level? And that might not be the right way of looking at the world. It may have just been a little too much of this antagonistic theory. Harris sent you 4 books in your Hungry Hippo. You're only able to tag yourself. You know, the tagging here is a little bit weird. You tag the conversation. So if you tagged them and they tagged you, it goes back to the original tag. So it's just Twitch being Twitch. Viper says you only quote quotes that. That's right, Vipers. I agree. Yeah, it's a silly Twitch thing. Ivan says gaining status can be moral, right? Like helping family gains you some status within it. Sure, but like, see, that's the thing. Then it becomes very questionable exactly what do you mean by like gaining status, or is it antagonistic at that point? Like, being a helpful person, is that really a fight that you're like fighting for status, or are you just being a good person and then like people recognize that you are a decent person, and like, did you actually fight for that status? Like, it doesn't always make, like, you can put it in an antagonistic sort of framework, but it's not going to work all the time. And so you got to think, is this really what we're is that really the right way of thinking about how we interact with each other? Are we really always fighting? Yeah, that's part of it, Pink Lady. Helping family in order to get status seems like a fucked up concept to you, because then you're not helping family, you're fighting for status. But like, I think people would disagree with people saying all we're doing is fighting for status underneath. Yeah, that's right, Ivan. Like, people look into altruism studies. Yep. No, so there's definitely people on both sides. I'm just saying a lot of people disagree that everything is always constantly a fight. Yeah. So,